Hello and welcome to my talk. And also, I know it's lunch, so thanks for coming to this talk. And I want to give a short notion for tomorrow's meeting. Tomorrow during lunch again, we have a Birds of Feathers meeting headed by John Kolb, which is more or less like a group debate about user groups, where we usually exchange our feedback and our knowledge about user groups here at CppCon. And quick introduction about myself. I'm Jens Weller. I run Meaning C++ since 2012. And today my job basically can be described as being a C++ evangelist. And I thought I'd start this talk with a short history of this talk, because it's not like the first time I give this talk or a similar talk. This started in 2012 when I gave a first talk at my own conference, which started in 2012. Then in 2013, I gave a similar talk together with John Kolb back in C++ Now in 2013. And then we actually gave a talk at the first CppCon about this together again, like similar to the talk we gave in the prior year, but then a bit updated. And ever since then, we basically had only at CppCon this Birds of the Feather meeting. At Meaning C++, I kind of managed to rescue a little bit of the talk to motivate people to give new user groups a try, and to an update, which is basically run in front of everyone on the conference. And you also could, since I introduced the launch track, I think in 2016, debate and meet about user groups at Meaning C++. But basically, if you look at the web, the last recording on how to do this and what we actually could do with user groups is from 2014. So I decided this year is the year where we should give this an update, because we have a lot of active user groups which are active since 2011, and a few ones are even longer than that active, and we have a lot of new user groups and some innovation in this space. So I wanted to just give this an update. And so just let me quickly introduce you to the goals of this talk. As I said, an update from 2014, 15, including that, and addressing the existing groups, which we didn't in the past because it was just too few groups which existed for a long time. And this conference started with something very interesting, as John said. John said that C++ is people. And so I very much agree with that. We're a community, and we have now, like, if I look like what we were in 2012 and why I decided in 2012 to actually, start Meaning C++ and also to do a little bit of community work, because like we have so much FUD about our language, but there's very, very little done for community back in that space. And even an idea like CppCon was in 2012 seen as crazy. Just running a conference on its own from scratch, new about C++, that wasn't really understood as a good idea back then. And through Meeting C++ and CppCon, this changed, and now we have like a lot better and more active community than we had in the past. And we also can just quickly an overview on the user groups. This is 2011. There's an active user group for a few years in Oslo, but this disbanded after a few years then. And there's my first user group in Düsseldorf, which I started, which back then is still for the whole state. And ACCU is actually in Great Britain and some other. They have been active for a long time. And 3 years later, there's a lot more user groups, and you can see this now. My user group actually has split up in 3 different user groups. My user group is still existing, but there's now also one in Aachen, in Bochum, and in Cologne. And if you fast forward to what happened after that last year, this is like the situation. So we have a lot more reach into the community in Europe. And worldwide, there used to be a world map, and I was like really enjoying the idea of showing you this world map. And then when I clicked on that link, I found out that this world map doesn't exist anymore. So we really would like to have a world map, and if you kind of have any knowledge of that technology and like having a world map on the web, please contact John, Kolb, or me, because that's something like which we would like to bring back, but we're currently not able because the startup had the idea of start charging for this, and currently we're not like sure how to resolve the situation. It's probably something we will probably be able to debate tomorrow, but that's like nice to have, which we would like to have again. And as I also kind of often run surveys on Twitter, I thought, well, let's just ask, how many are actually attending these user group meetings. And as you see, it's about 33%. Of course, it's only the part of the community which we can reach over Twitter. And then I was, well, actually, conferences are also interesting, so let's ask that. And conferences is 30%, and it seems to be that far more people find that interesting and voted on that, but maybe just it was a better day for Twitter to ask a survey. And then when I prepared the talk, I realized actually you can combine those, which more reasonable results. So we can see that with conferences and user groups, etc., we reach like about 50% of the community which are coming here and which are interactive, which are connected to, which actually could meet someone which has been at a conference or at a user group. And then there's 50% of our community which I hope we reach through videos and other things and CppCast. And then there's the other part, those famous dark matter developers, which if you know physics, dark matter doesn't react with anything, and we can just kind of not interact with those folks, and they probably will also not interact with us. So a large part of the community is still kind of not coming to conferences and not coming to user groups, so we don't have like a perfect distribution of user groups yet, and we probably never have that, and that's also okay, and I hope that we reach the other part of our community through the web, through the videos, through the recording. That's also why I found it really important that we record this session, because this is actually also going out to everyone who is out there in our community and not yet able to come here, or not, there's a lot of people who have lunch now, and I respect that. Let me quickly introduce you to my idea of what a user group is. So I always had the idea that a user group is, or at least what I call a user group, is a local thing. Okay, so it's a city, it's an area. When I started, it was like a whole state, North Rhine-Westphalia, because there was nothing. And it was the first meeting I had people coming from Aachen, and people from Aachen showed up for several years before they actually got together and had their own group, and they then still kept coming. And also very important is it's only a group if you meet regularly, and not like if you meet like twice a year because some traveling speaker comes to town. And I also want to stress that I think that it's really important that a group fosters its own speakers and has like local speakers. More on that later. And also, I think it's like just an opportunity to build a local network for the community and have the community on a local base. So, quickly want to run through on how you could get started with such a group. So, basically, there's like 4 important things for getting started. And the first thing is like, people who come to your group, but also who help you organizing it. Location is really important. The content, of course, is always a question where people are like, if we don't have enough speakers, what do we do? If we don't have talks, do we meet? People coming even if we don't have a talk. And of course, the most important thing is like to actually get started. And with people, I think like you always have to kind of keep in mind that the folks which attend your meetings, they like to plan ahead. So you should make notice of that they're able to come to your meetings, not just like advance a week early, advance early and advance often. And have in mind that it's your target audience, and ideally you have like every level between beginner and expert, but mostly in my experience, you have a lot of people showing up from intermediate and some experts, and beginners usually show up when you actually have content for them, like introduction into the language, etc. And of course, let's not forget there's organizers, and it's always like important to grow a team if you have a user group, especially if your user group is larger, that you have multiple roles, etc. I'm going to take a look at that later. And especially I want to stress that you do not need to be a C++ expert to organize a user group. Organizing a user group does not involve a lot of C++. Even selecting talks does not need you to actually have deep knowledge and to review the talks for your user group. It's just often when you have a person who wants to present and just you kind of see that the topic is related to C++, you often can trust them and they deliver usually good talks. And also, it's kind of important to know how to reach out to your local community, how to find these folks you now want to have as your attendees, and maybe even co-organizers. Your own network is really important, but then there's also social media. I happily can tweet a link to your local user group so that all folks which kind of are in the online community know about you. And don't forget like local forums, chats, hacker spaces, where kind of, the nerds hang out. And then there's Meetup. Most groups are on Meetup. That's actually a pretty good platform to also reach out and find people. But it has a cost, and it's also a little bit depends on which country you are with Meetup. In the West, it's kind of a good thing, and in other countries, there's other alternatives. So you kind of have to do some research. What's actually the best web platform to represent your user group? Yes. Yes. So the question was, do I mean meetup.com? Yeah, I should have added that .com. That's missing. Which brings me to locations. This is like a really important part of your group where you meet. Some groups have their first meeting or some meetings in bars and restaurants and social places like that. That's generally great, and some restaurants have like a room where you can have a projector, which is like the last point. You need some room where you can run a presentation, and otherwise you are not likely able to target your audience with talks, etc. So this is often now a lot of the user groups host in companies because they already have this required thing in some room, like meeting rooms, but there's also cafeterias, etc. And my own group is in a hackerspace. Hackerspaces usually also have like some way to project something from a laptop or have a meeting room. And this is just a few examples of user groups where they're actually meeting. So I've seen a few pictures where people seem to sit in a cafeteria, which is also an easy way to host people because you have food and drinks usually already in reach there. So this is Stockholm, and in the center that is Malmö. Malmö has the great opportunity that they have a space which is funded by companies, which gives them a free hosting and free paid drink. So they have free drinks and free food after each meeting, and all the organizer has to do is to call up this place, which is called Fu Cafe, and they just tell him when basically they have time to host this meeting, and that's where he hosts, and that's a really big success. And otherwise, a lot of the other places meet in companies or in hackerspaces or in other places, and then you often have to kind of see if food is available, if drinks are available, and if you want to offer that at your meeting. And of course, that's when I searched through the images of the user groups, I found this from the Berlin user group, and actually I remember this meeting because I was attending this. really important, help your audience to come to your meeting. And sometimes, this is typical in Berlin, that you have a lot of startups being in some weird place where you probably don't really know how to get there. And then a map with some arrows can be a great help. And of course, also, if you're like in a building, maybe you need some signage so people can actually find your meeting. And I wanted to also to say a quick word on the hosting itself. Free hosting is from the perspective of an organizer, so you don't have to pay or don't have to rely on somebody to have your room. So this is like from a hackerspace or something like that. And of course, this can differ. Like your room could be free, maybe the food and the drinks you have to pay for, or attendees have to pay for. Sponsored. Most companies, when they host, they also bring food and drinks with that. That's why companies are often a very interesting sponsor for your meetings. And paid is kind of, I think none of our user groups like have a membership fee where you could kind of fund things from. That's something I've been looking into recently, but I think that's like really difficult to implement in today's world. But of course, you could. That's also another option which you could go. That your user group basically has a paid membership, and you actually have exclusive meetings for your paid members. Which brings me to content, which I think is like one of the most important things to be aware of. That there is more than talks. The coding dojo is a good alternative, which is interactive and helps you to connect with your group, and your group connects with itself through this. I couldn't really look at this morning's keynote mentioning REPL.it, but just from the quick look I had, it looks really interesting. Could be something similar than Coding Dojo, something where you can actually share interactively code with people and debate code. One thing I did in the beginning of my group, we had often video interviews, usually with Michael Wong, about user group committee meetings, which are also kind of a user group. And that is actually a very, very good alternative when you need to kind of cover a talk or a meeting when you don't have a speaker. And yes, question? Okay, yeah. So what do I mean by video interview? Basically, you Skype with a speaker, personality from our community. My user group usually did it with Michael Wong. We had then, he was sitting in Canada, and it nicely fits with him having lunch, and we have the user group in the evening in Germany, and that is actually a great way to have something else than a talk. But you have to keep in mind that you of course need a good internet connection, which is reliable, which in some places can be difficult. So debates in book club. The book club is more or less a debate about books. This is like one thing which I thought about and tried in my user groups. That's actually a pretty good success. Ask your user group to bring their favorite C++ book. And of course, half of the attendees will, of course, forget to bring a book or not really want to bring a book, but they still can, kind of tell the audience then about what their C++ book of choice is, or what their latest book was. And I was actually amazed how well this went. And so sometimes it's just great to have people meet and have a conversation. Similar thing, C++ quiz, where you have somebody on front and there's some websites for it, or you create your own, where you just present some riddles. And Meaning C++ is also doing that. We also have a C++ quiz from Diego every year, but that's a bit more difficult. Diego is actually doing some really evil questions there. And of course, you can have lightning talks. And lightning talks are really, really an important part of your user group, because this brings people into speaking. this helps you to kind of see which of your members are willing to give a talk. And a lot of speakers here also at CppCon started at a user group with a lightning talk. And then they gave a full presentation on the same topic or on some similar topic. And this brings me to talks. There's like a lot of things you can present as a talk at a user group. And I remember like I had one speaker who did not have slides. And this was a little bit uncommon from what we were used to, but he basically just showed us the code and was just talking through the code. And that's also actually a quite good example of that you don't always have to fit with the expectations of having a talk is. I again want to mention the audience. It's really important to understand that what content you offer shapes your group. If you only talk about template metaprogramming and advanced topics and expert topics, your group will be experts only, and your group will probably be not at the maximum of attendees, which you actually could, and your potential is not then really where it could be. So you kind of have to mix that, and sometimes it's difficult to achieve that as an organizer because it's just so many people wanting to give a talk is not a problem you have as an organizer often. And also I want to state that a lot of those content activities you can do with your team. That's also a great way to convey information to your team and to have your team kind of be the founding cell of a potential user group. Your team could be the seat and your employer could be the host. So we go to the first meeting. As I mentioned, it's difficult to get started, but if you don't get started, you're not going to get anywhere. There are no ideal dates, and the location you choose usually also has like a date in mind, or they offer you the dates where they're available. And your attendees and actually we would like to meet on a Tuesday, but we only have space for actually hosting the meeting on a Thursday. Similar with conferences. It's not like that a conference can choose their time frame if they want it to be in a certain location. They have some options, but then the location often is the last factor which actually determines if a meeting can happen. And have in mind that starting during holiday times, during summer, or also during December, Christmas time can be hard. I kind of could do it with my group, but I would today maybe do it in a different way. Or just have in mind that if you start in those times, your user group might still be on a way to get better in the future with attendance. Yes? Question?
I would like to compliment a little bit about the ideal date. For me, ideal date is either first or last week of the month to avoid overlap with CppCon and C++ now, because they typically take place on the second or third week of the month. That's a small compliment.
So there's a comment that you should choose the first or the last week of the month to not conflict with CppCon or C++ now. But these are only once a year. And 50% of us are not even here. It's not even 50%. It's like, what was the number? It's like 70% are not here. And some user groups can, be flexible. I'm here. I'm the user group organizer. And I could Skype in the meeting of my user group right now because they're right now meeting. It actually matches out. So as a user group, you have to be flexible. And there's always some people which are not here, which are not at C++ now. There's meeting C++. There's a lot of other conferences. So you will have conflicts. And we had a conflict in the summer with a C++ committee meeting. And we decided to cancel our meeting because of that. And that was like the first meeting we canceled since our existence in 2011. And when I got through tips, so when you start for the first time, don't expect too many people. This is just the first, the first people checking you out, and if they like it, they probably come back. reach out to local companies. Fluctuation is quite common, and kind of try to establish a regular meeting at least. And then maybe you can also have like, you don't have to meet once a month. You can have multiple meetings. You can do different things. But you always have to have kind of an organizer team or an organizer which is willing to do that. And then another thing, when your group gets bigger, you might think about having an agenda. And as an organizer, there is something really, really important when you moderate and say things on stage to your user group. There is a trap. You have to say the simple things every time. Even if it's the 12th meeting, the 100th meeting, there are new people which have their first meeting with your group. And you need to convey this basic information every time. And it's so easy to forget about it. It happened to me one year in meeting C++ where I forgot a few things because, hey, I said that last year. And most of the attendees came back in the previous years, but I got some feedback from the new attendees about that. Sponsoring, just a few words on that. Hosting meetings, HR is a good partner to provide you funding, and recording. I thought about speaking about recording, but I think it's probably something where other people, I know that there's a few user group organizers which actually do that, and I have also experience with the recording. But this also could come from a sponsor. And have in mind, our community doesn't really like marketing and change their perspective. So it's good to have sponsors, but don't sell out. And otherwise, probably your user group is not really consistent of a lot of people. And very don't really trust your sponsors and don't like spend hundreds of euros on equipment with your own money, which is promised from some sponsor to pay that. Prefer that your sponsors actually do the payment and not that you have to reimburse them. And with so many user groups, we have unfortunately also some user groups which become inactive. So I quickly want to mention that it has really a great value when you're able to reach out to the existing members of such a meetup group, but often the organizers are not anymore in that area, and sometimes it can happen that you are not able to reach the person which actually has the rights on meetup to be the organizer and transfer the organizership. And if there's an active group, if you want to help organizing, you're always welcome. Every organizer is happy when they can grow their team. And also, you have a bigger chance of success if you like have an idea for something and you would like to I don't know. It can be everything. It could go like, I don't know, go C++ hiking with folks. Just if you have an idea in an existing group, that gives you a better chance of success. But not all have that option. Starting new can be the only option, but also it can be that like the existing group is not flexible. It's not flexible enough. Then you might have to start your own thing, and if you're fine with that, that's a good option. And quickly, I think now we come to the part where we talk about like what to do on the next meetings and how like we should or could structure groups for a long-term perspective. So in your next meetings, prefer topics which are interesting for a lot of folks over like really specialized talks. Have in mind the alternatives. Lightning talks are also a great way to get people into talking and speaking, but it's also, if you start, maybe you don't have enough lightning talks. Lightning talks is great if you have enough lightning talks, because they're so short. So if you want to host lightning talks, have in mind that you might also want to host some different content when you don't have enough submissions for lightning talks. And from the structure, it's really important to socialize first, to give folks to arrive, also some time to arrive. Maybe, you know, the train is late, which I know it's not like a thing in the US, but in Europe it's a thing that trains are late. Then have your content, breaks, and also end with some time to socialize. Because some folks have to leave earlier than others and they need to catch a train. And then the long-term perspective. Yeah, so basically any larger group needs to be able to build a team and fill those roles I have listed here. And please have in mind, this is an idealized group. It's fine if you don't have all those roles. They're not like required. Usually multiple people have this role, and you always, you know, have the opportunity to mentor people into new roles and to grow your base of organizers, which then again is also able to be better and active as a user group. So I'm just quickly going to run through those. Location contact, this is for me like the contact person to the hackerspace. They're usually kind of scouting locations or contacting locations, and they basically have the key to the location. Can be your hosting contact or someone else. Speaker contact, your pipeline for talks, and of course everyone who wants to give a talk should ideally reach out to them, or you forward them to this person. Attendee contact, a lot of the organizers are busy. And when I attend the user group in Aachen, everyone I know there is like busy as an organizer, and I kind of sit there and have to see if they have a greeter role. And yeah, that also kind of would be the role which fills the code of conduct if you have that in your group. More on that later. Meeting planning is, for me, kind of, you know, actually where the decisions are made for when, where, and why, and team lead, kind of, in your team. Moderation is also something really, really important. You know, they lead through your meeting, they introduce speakers, they make opportunities and announcements. And then the last role, the greeter. It's probably probably a role which not a lot of people have in mind. But you know, you're kind of a social meeting, so you gotta have some folks which actually welcome new folks and make people feel welcome. There's some attendees which come alone and don't know anybody, and we all know how great our social skills are, so it's always great to have a role which helps people to feel welcome and socialize in your group. It's especially important for new members, because when your group, especially longer running groups, all the members which have like their 5th or 6th meeting at your group, they know enough people. They're just coming there and saying hi. But then this can happen that like new people are kind of feeling left out, or are not sure where they should talk to and how they. This is like the role which kind of connects new folks to your group. And also kind of important as an organizer or as a speaker contact, know your local speakers. That's just a selection of well-known local speakers, which I'm lucky to have. And maybe I know there's some people in a role in areas where it's not so many speakers or where it's more speakers. So always know like kind of which talks were like good attended, or which speakers gave a good talk, and you can ask them for a specific talk, and always try to grow that speaker base for your own group. I also quickly want to say something about code of conduct. That's like the question if you want to have that or not. That's your decision. I think it's a good way to also have a signal to underrepresented groups. So that certain members of our community might not show up if you don't actually are taking this serious. And it's like a really good signal that you take the issues which underrepresented people in our community have every day serious, and that they can feel safe at your meetup. The code of conduct which I use for my conference and the user group is the Berlin Code of Conduct. I want to point to Include CPP. Hash Include does a great job on helping and educating folks on these issues. And if you have any questions or if you want to join our group for that, that's actually a very good place to get some feedback on anything code of conduct related and other things C++. And I just want to say a few words on like your group and diversity. Diversity is like really a hard problem. If you're looking for a hard problem, diversity is like one of the hardest problems to solve. Also kind of, it depends like on the local population which you have. So you're a local group and don't have like high expectations on it, but make sure that you have the right environment, that people feel welcome, and also have in mind that diversity is not only people. It's also in the content you offer, and it's in your audience, and it's topics that you address experts. And the one thing which I think is really important to understand is that if you have a talk for beginners, that can be interesting to experts also, because experts often have to teach that. And so if you're having an expert topic in the evening, the beginner fraction of your group probably will not show up. But if you have a beginner talk, it's not that the experts don't show up. Maybe some of them have a better thing to do, but you probably will reach more people than, because experts are always interested in knowing and how to teach a certain topic. And also, meeting always on the same day is also kind of excluding people. So every decision you make with your user group kind of selects against certain people randomly because they are not available on that weekday or on that week. Maybe they're at CppCon, maybe they are somewhere else. And I already talked about code of conduct. Which brings me to what the community can do for you. So when I started meeting C++, it was pretty much the dark times for community-based work, and I'm pretty happy actually that Include is existing now today, because they also do community work, and John Korb does community work, and there's just a growing number of people which are active in our community and caring about the community, which is really great. So for user groups, what I can do for you is I have a monthly listing. I have a contact form for user groups, and I have an alphabetical listing, and I, of course, have a large network on social media which can help you grow your group. So in detail, the monthly listing, I try to put that out at the beginning of the month, but sometimes I fail in that. But generally, try to have your meeting in Meetup announced by the first of the month. Then it's pretty safe that I'm able to crawl Meetup as my archive crawler and have you on my list. Also, don't edit this listing for the reason that in the beginning I did that, and I kind of teach people that they could kind of announce their meetings once I had my listing up, and then I would edit their meetings in. And I decided that is not the way I want to go. That's too much work. This is now 30 groups, and we usually have per month, I think, and in the better months we have like 40 to 50 groups worldwide meeting now. And I also post this on all the other platforms for C++. Then I have I have a page for user groups where you find more details, where you can like find some of the thoughts, which is like based on this talk and other talks. And I probably will write a new blog post after we get some feedback from this talk and what we will debate more tomorrow. And there's an alphabetical listing. I have a user group contact form, so there's a registration form for user groups where you kind of give me your contact, and then I can list you on this form, and that's what I use to contact the groups for this talk, and speakers, etc. can use this form to contact you as a group. Then going over to isocpp.org. Isocpp.org is also a great place where you could announce your new group, which would help because it also reaches out very well to the community. And they also have a user groups worldwide listing in the wiki. Then that's where you find the link to the world map. Again, I want to kind of say that world map currently is unfortunately not anymore online, but we would really like to have that. And if you're able to help us with getting this back online in some way or another, we already have the list of user groups, we have the cities. That would be really great. That would be a really important part to have this again. And then there's something new which John Korb started this year. Thank you for this, John. There is CppCon.org, which is basically an organization dedicated to user groups and their organizers. And we have a monthly group chat, mostly in Hangout, but maybe also through some other technologies in the future. And there's also a user group starter kit available on this page. And if you go there and actually download the starter kit, you'll find a document about recording, where I don't have the time to actually go into recording this time. It's also like, in my location, I cannot record because the lighting is really bad, and in some locations you will find that recording is difficult, and then even if you record, maybe the sound is bad, or all those issues you have with recording. I don't think that when you start a user group, you directly want to start recording, because recording can be really frustrating. Which brings me to conclusions. When starting, I just had some points which things you can prepare and which help you succeed. And have in mind that we are now really a well-connected community, and through several ways we can help you reach out to your local community through the internet and through other ways, and help with the success of starting another user group. There are so many user groups now which are active that starting a user group in your city can be really easy. And again, when you join, you can think, what can you add? You don't have to be an organizer. You can give talks or prepare a lightning talk. And it's also it's fine to just attend. That's really good too, because we are also doing this for the community. And maybe then later, a lot of speakers have attended the group for a year or two before they actually thought about presenting. So yeah, organizers are always happy to help you, and it's like your local community. Don't forget that. It's like when you're looking for a job or you're looking for someone's help, that's like a really good place to go to if you actually want to have some debate about some topic in person. And that brings me to questions. Again, tomorrow at lunch, we meet with John Korb and a few other organizers for user groups. Also, people who want to start a user group are very welcome there. You can reach me on Twitter, per email. You can reach John, and there's include CPP. And of course, you can ask questions now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in the CppCon.org link that you mentioned, the sort of startup kit.
Yes.
Could you tell us how to find it on the CppCon website, please? Because I'm not able to find it at the moment.
Let me go back. So there's the menu is on the bottom, and I have no idea how this looks on mobile. There's a little bit in the making. So if you click on Starter Kit, you will find a link to that Starter Kit.
For anyone else who misread it, I was seeing CppCon.org, and that's CppCom.org.
Yeah, it's an
Thank you very much.
com. I think this stands for community. Any more questions?
So from your experience, what's been the response from your members towards sponsors and sponsorships and their reception of that?
I think it's quite well understood that certain things can only exist if you have a sponsor. So usually the reaction of the community to that is good, especially like if it's a company hosting. The things which you should try to avoid is like overreach. At the end, you host a user group meeting and not a sponsored marketing event. So if you have bad experience with a sponsor, that's fine, and the community will not blame you for it. But of course, you have to see how and with which sponsors you want to have a long-term relationship. And local companies are usually fine. There's some offers from some companies. So that's all fine. Just have in mind that I know that like hosting always at the same company or hosting at a large corporation has some benefits, but also might be not as I don't know how to say it. It's like I think that as a user group you should be independent from your sponsor, because otherwise maybe your sponsor decides to there can be several problems. I think the first problem I would see is like when the sponsor actually is also like your employer and they founded the user group and then they decided to shut it down. And then you basically are relying on them giving you access to the meetup if you don't actually are the organizer there. And other things, so far I think the groups have not really have bad experience with sponsoring. Just I think that sponsors should not like overdo the marketing.
When I do C++ all day, every day. So, but there are other meetups from other programming languages in the area I live in. And when I go to those meetups, the typical talk is somebody wants to show what a great programmer they are. So they talk about the advanced features and the leading edge of the programming language, which is useless for me because I'm dealing with a programming language that I barely know. And what do you think the balance should be between advanced and beginner talks?
So the question is, what should be the balance of having talks for advanced and for beginners? I would always try to let your speakers know which kind of talks you want to have. And a lot of people, of course, as you say, they want to show off. They want to speak about this new feature which they want to learn, maybe. So a lot of people can be motivated and giving talks when they like present something like a new language feature, which is also interesting to beginners. But on the other hand, my long-term experience as an organizer is this can be really difficult. But try to offer content which is interesting to beginners. Try to have coding dojos, interactive things in your meetup will then help you target other folks which are not advanced. But I know the problem. I know what you're talking about. But I think it's important to mention that you always should try to kind of fight that a little as an organizer, to try to actually get people to do introductions and other things. And a lot of people have to be kind of reminded that they could give a talk, even beginners or intermediate folks, which I don't know like the advanced features, just giving an introduction to a library or something like that. And it's also kind of easy to prepare.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the meeting C++ and the encouragement that both you and John give to the community. I know it's been very helpful for me with my group. And I wanted to mention my experience and ask you if you know if this is a more general thing. If I know that if there's one person who's thirsty for a meetup, for a user group, then it has been my experience that once you start a group, people will come to you. So you don't need, when I started my group, people just came and said, okay, I want to come. I want to try to help. I want to give a talk. And it's been very easy to find speakers usually. Sometimes you need to prod them, but very often everybody is willing to help because everybody wants to participate. And I'm wondering if if you've heard of, you're seeing this as a typical thing for many groups or something else.
So the question is if if it's easy to find speakers or if that's not a thing.
Speakers and
or
attendees,
general participation. And it depends on your location and it depends where you host. And finding speakers is often kind of also representative for where you start your group. If you're in a tech hub where a lot of meetups, where a lot of startups, where a lot of other things, and already a base of speakers exists which you can tap in, then it's easy. But if you're in a city where that doesn't exist, it can be a lot harder. And it also depends on the size of your user group. If your user group has every time 50 or 100 attendees, of course you can draw a lot easier from that base than when you only my user group usually has 10 attendees. So I know finding speakers is not always an easy problem. And as an organizer, you kind of have to be comfortable with filling a meeting by giving a talk. That's what I have done often. And at the beginning, I had the luck that someone from Aachen was a university instructor. That's, by the way, also kind of important to get your user group to know who is maybe teaching C++ in their company or in a university. These folks are always happy to speak, but maybe they have to be asked or something, So reach out to potential speakers. That's very good.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to ask questions of someone who probably knows more about starting meetups than anybody in the C++ community. You mentioned something about having meetups on different days of the week.
Yeah.
And I had always kind of thought it made more sense to be consistent, but you were kind of saying, well, but that excludes people, and I understand that. My local user group always met on Wednesday night. I had a conflict every Wednesday night for several years, and I couldn't go at all. And so I understand that, but I wonder about the trade-off of the consistency. So are there meetups that you know of that are deliberately, moving around the week? And what's their experience? Okay. You deliberately pick different nights of the week?
Yeah.
I see. Very interesting. I see. Oh, you move the location. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So this.
So he was saying that they moved the location, and someone else said in their internal corporate they changed regularly. They picked different days of the week. Switching gears, I wanted to say something about sponsorship, because I know that some user groups have actually created, and I think this is a great idea, created a prospectus of if it's great, because if you're talking to somebody who might be a sponsor, you might not remember everything you thought about, but to think about it and say, well, this is what we would expect of a sponsor. This is what they would get. That doesn't mean you're locked into that. You could always talk to a sponsor and say, oh, well, you want to do that? Yeah, I guess we could do that. But it sets an expectation. So if you said this is what it would cost, someone else might want to do something a little different, but they kind of have an idea what that's going to cost. And so I thought that was a great idea. And one of the things I like about it is that if a recruiter talks to me and I'm not really looking, I say, well, if you're interested in hiring C++ people, you might consider sponsoring the local user group. And if I have a URL, I can say, by the way, here's the URL, check it out. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. I thought that was a great idea. But thank you again very much.
I think those sponsorship projectors are a great way to communicate your group to potential sponsors and kind of know what to expect. That's a really great way.
And I think, Adi, you have one, right? Yeah. So going there, you'd see a good model, I think, for when.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it is, and I'm not certain. Is it? I think it is, but I'm not certain.
On the topic of moving around, the experience we've had with our user group is that we move both the locations and the day of the week. So day of the week is usually either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. I never tried the weekends, but I mean to try it at one point just to see what's going to happen. We also moved the locations. We've got 2 different regular locations that we alternate between so that if one of them ever cannot host us anymore, we already have someone we can rely on in that case, in this kind of event. But we also usually visit a new venue twice a year approximately. And that has been very helpful because it also helps us reach new members of the community that never heard about the meetup. So if you stick in the same venues, it can be very comfortable for your regular attendees, but you may be missing out on a lot of new potential attendees that never heard about you. So visiting new venues only a single time doesn't need to be a regular thing. They don't need to become regular venues, but that's a very good way to reach new people too.
Also, like, probably a point I should make is your attendees are a great source for potential hosts and sponsors. And I know that the Aachen group is very, very successful in Germany with hosting in 2 or 3 different companies and hence moving around. And that way it's also a lot easier for companies to commit, because for a lot of companies, they don't have the budget to host you every month.
And another thing for venues is that if your meetup has not had its first meetup yet, one thing that worked very well for us is just reserving a room in a public library. So we had a small group, and that was one way to have a free room and to start developing contacts and maybe already find people who are interested in helping organize or find venues. So that was a very good way to start early.
Thank you. Okay, I think this closes the session then. Thank you for coming.